Hi, I'm Ardith, and today I'm showing lots of different ways that you can get more from your Stencils 360 tool. Never heard of it? Here's a video I made showing all the amazing things that you can do with it when it first came out this past summer. Haven't decided whether you want to buy it yet? Today's video shows lots of ways to go beyond the basics and really get your money's worth. Let's dive right in. The first question that everyone seems to ask when they see this tool is whether or not it can be used with 6-inch square stencils that we already have in our craft room. The answer is yes, and I made a video last week that shows how to turn your 6-inch square stencils either with or without the tool. Let's talk about the method first. When you use this tool with its own round stencils, you use the round stencil guides to turn them. The tool also comes with paper guides for ensuring that your cardstock is placed precisely in the center of the design, and one of them is a 6-inch square. So the easy solution is to just use that paper guide as a stencil guide. I learned in my last video that there can be a slight gap between the stencil and the guide, so if you don't want ink blending through there, it's easy to add some washi tape all along the edges rather than just in spots. Another thing I learned is that when I use a 6-inch square piece of paper with a 6-inch paper guide, the corners can often get caught as I turn the stencil. So for me, the easiest way to avoid that issue is to use an 8-inch square piece of cardstock. Okay, now let's talk about stencil choice. This is the key to success for turning your stencils either with or without the tool. For my first card, I'm using this Altenew Wreath Stencil, and I know it will work because it's a circular design. It has berries in the center, so I covered them with washi as well. And then it's just a matter of blending ink through the stencil and turning the guide. Now this stencil creates a beautiful wreath with no turning at all, but by turning it you can get a more full and layered look. You can turn it on angles that are printed on the base if you want, or you can do like I did here and just turn until you feel like there's an area that needs some filling in. I used 2 shades of green ink as well to add more depth, and here's what it looked like. Until I decided that it had one more spot that needed filling in, so I put it back in place for one last blend. Now the beauty of using an 8-inch square piece of cardstock for this design is that I was able to get 2 cards out of the one blend. To finish these cards, I added die cut and stamped sentiments along with some jewels to act as berries in the wreath. I've listed all my supplies in the description below if you're interested. But what about other stencils? Most 6-inch square stencils are not really designed to turn, and if you do it, you'll quickly end up with a very busy panel. But what about the Concord and 9th Turnabout stencils? These stencils are designed to turn, but only 4 times, so I thought it would be fun to try them with this tool. The set I have is quite old. It's called Retro Petals, and I know that there are more recent ones that may give different results, but let's give this a whirl. I start with the yellow ink and I do the normal 4 turns, using the marks on the base to know where my 90-degree turns are. Yep, there it is. This is how the stencil's meant to look. You could do each turn with 4 colors to get a different look, but this is the basic pattern. But let's just throw caution to the wind and try layering it up, starting at a different point and doing 90-degree turns from there. For this layer, I started at the 45-degree mark and I used orange ink. Again, I turned it 4 times, 90 degrees from the previous point. My original hope was that each of these little leaf clusters would magically turn into daisies, but that just shows the limit of my geometric math skills, because when I lifted it up, only the center one was centered, and in retrospect, that makes perfect sense. Now, I wasn't sure whether to go on or not, but I figured since I was experimenting, I may as well go all the way. So I repositioned the stencil and I did 4 more turns with pink ink, starting at a different starting point, and then I did it all again with blue ink. Now here's the big reveal. Now this is a very busy pattern, but there is a pattern here. You can see what I mean about doing this with some stencils that would just give you a crazy busy background, and that may be a look you like, but this one is plenty busy for me. To finish this card, I added a big white Concord and 9th die cut thanks sentiment and a few jewels. Nothing more needed on this busy mosaic type background. Now let's move back to things you can do with the round stencils. The second most asked question I get is whether you can use the tool to create slimline cards. Again, the answer is yes. There's no paper guide for a slimline card panel, but one of the other neat things that I've figured out is that you can put your paper wherever you want it within the circle to position your design where you want it. Let me show you. Here's a panel of white cardstock that's 8 inches by 3 inches. I'm going to be using the 4-inch stencil from the Sacred Lotus set, so I've got the 4-inch stencil guide. When you use a stencil guide, the design will always be in the very center of the area of the base, So to get your design off-center on your card, simply move your paper so that the design will be where you want it. I tucked the bottom end of that long cardstock panel underneath the bottom portion of the base, since when I put the stencil and the guide into it, it would crease the cardstock. On my first try, I had the corner of the white cardstock right on the edge of the stencil guide, and that's probably not the best idea since it might get caught as I turn the stencil. So I kept moving the cardstock and testing with the stencil guide until I had that circular hole in the place where I wanted my flower to be. Then I put the stencil in place and I started blending red ink through to create a poinsettia. Everything works as normal now, except you can see that the design will be offset. After a few petals in red, I cleaned the stencil and I changed to green for a couple to give me the look of some leaves. And that's another thing you can do to change the look. You can change the colors as much or as little as you want. You could even skip some of the petals to get another look. So here's my poinsettia, and you can see that I got some ink blended through the gap between the stencil and the guide. I'll just use my sand eraser to remove that in a minute. But first I'm going to move my panel and put another flower near the bottom. Yes, you can put more than one design on your card front, especially when it's one of the smaller designs like this Lotus. This time I made sure to put the top end of the cardstock under that base to avoid any creasing, and then I put a ton of tape on the stencil so that I wouldn't have any gaps, and I blended the red ink through and also some green for some leaves. I blended some yellow ink into the centers of my flowers to give them more of a poinsettia look, just freehand with a blending brush, and then I got out that eraser to get rid of the extra ink. I spritzed the panel with the clear shimmer spray, and then I used one of the Essential Circles dies and cut out the flowers. I used a Concord and 9th Joy die as my sentiment. My next card shows a variation on a technique I used in my previous video, which I'll link below, where you make your own stencil. In that video, I used a 4-inch circle, a die, and the stencil guide. It works great, but it limits you to a 4-inch wreath if you get what I mean. This time I'm going to make use of that larger Sacred Lotus stencil with the 8-inch stencil guide. First, I traced the petal onto a piece of cardstock, and then I cut it out with scissors. Next, I grabbed an old Lawn Fawn Christmas tree die. You can use any die that will fit on this petal-shaped cardstock. I cut it out using my die cutting machine, and then I taped the little stencil to the larger stencil. Again, I don't want any ink blending through the edges, so I cover them fully with tape. I place a card-sized piece of cardstock onto my work surface so that my semicircle of trees will start on the edge. I could have used a bigger piece and gotten another 2-for-1 design if I'd been thinking, but I was really focused on that half circle of trees I wanted to create. I turned the stencil to every other 15-degree mark, and I blended lime Ricky ink through the cardstock until I had my full half circle. Then I went back and I filled in my little forest with darker green trees in between by using the other 15-degree marks as my guide. Because of the shape of the tree, there's a slight overlap, and I'm loving the whimsical feel of this. I blended some pale blue ink in a circle for snow at the base of the trees and a night sky on top. I spritzed the whole panel with, you guessed it, clear shimmer spray, and I added a stamped sentiment. And finally, I have a bonus technique. This is a simple masking technique that will work with any 6-inch stencil you have because there's no turning involved. In fact, you don't need this tool for this technique, but it certainly makes it really easy. I simply taped this Altenew Feeling Dotty stencil to my cardstock before I put the 4-inch circle stencil guide over top, and I blended ink through. You could achieve the same look with a die-cut circle, which is why I say you don't need the tool, but it still results in a fun 2-for-1 design. I finished these cards with some black die cuts from a Jillian Vance design that I coated with Nouveau crystal drops and some chunky glitter from Studio Katia. I also added a 1/8-inch strip of black cardstock down the sides of the panels, and I put the crystal drops and glitter on them as well, to add a pop of drama on these very simple cards. So what do you think? I'm still exploring and experimenting, and I already have lots of ideas for my next video on this tool. I'm linking here to my first Stencils 360 tool video, where I show the basics of how to use this tool with its own stencils and even create your own stencil. I'm also linking to last week's video where I showed how to turn your 6-inch stencils either with or without the Stencils 360 tool. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.